There are children who grow up believing they're loved simply because they exist. Maria was not one of them. She learned early, perhaps too early, that her presence in the world was not a gift but a calculation, a number on a ledger that never quite balanced. She was born in a place where the earth itself seemed tired, a rural stretch of land in the interior where the sun baked the soil into something hard and unforgiving, where houses leaned against each other like old men too weary to stand alone. She was a fifth child in a line of 7. By the time Maria came into the world, her mother's eyes had already developed that distant look, that hollow stare of someone who was given too much of themselves and received too little in return. Her father worked the field when there was work to be had, his hands like tree bark, his words few and usually sharp. There was no celebration when Maria was born, no joy preserved in faded photographs or stories told around a table. She simply arrived, another mouth to feed in a house where food was already a daily negotiation with scarcity. The earliest memory Maria could recall with any clarity was standing on a wooden stool in front of a chipped ceramic sink. She could not have been more than 6 years old, maybe 7. Her small hands, red and wrinkled from the cold water, moved mechanically through a mountain of dishes that never seemed to diminish. The stool wobbled beneath her feet, unsteady on the uneven kitchen floor. Above her, a single bare bulb swung gently, casting moving shadows across the walls. The water had no heat. There was no money for such luxuries. She would plunge her hands into the icy basin and scrub at remnants of meals she had barely tasted, her fingers turning numb, her shoulders aching from reaching upward to faucet that seemed designed for someone twice her size. Her mother would pass through the kitchen without stopping, a ghost in her own home, and Maria learned not to expect acknowledgement. Sometimes one of her older siblings would shove past her to grab something from a shelf, and she would have to grip the edge of the sink to keep from falling. No one asked if she was tired. No one wondered if her hands hurt. She was simply there, fulfilling a function, occupying a role that needed filling. The family operated like a broken machine, each part grinding against the others, and Maria was a small cog that could be replaced, forgotten, or removed entirely without disrupting the whole. At night, she shared a mattress on the floor with 2 of her sisters. There were no separate rooms, no privacy, no space that belonged to her alone. She learned to make herself small, to take up as little space as possible, to fold her limbs inward and disappear into the darkness. Even in sleep, she felt the weight of being unwanted, that persistent sense that she was taking up air and resources that might be better used by someone else. School should have been an escape, but it became another theater of her invisibility. She walked 3 kilometers each way in shoes that had belonged to 2 siblings before her, the soles worn so thin she could feel every pebble in the road. Her uniform was a faded dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was difficult to distinguish from the patches. The other children noticed immediately. Children always notice. They have a radar for difference, for vulnerability, and they can be ruthless in their honesty. She remembers the whispers, the way clusters of girls would fall silent when she approached, then erupt in giggles once she passed. She remembers the boys who would hold their noses when she walked by, pantomiming disgust. Poverty has a smell, a look, a feel that cannot be hidden no matter how hard you try. It announces itself in the quality of fabric, the state of shoes, the way hair falls when there are no proper scissors or brushes. Maria carried her poverty like a sign she could not remove, and it marked her as separate, as less than, as someone who did not belong. The teacher saw her, but did not see her. She was quiet, never causing trouble, her assignments completed in handwriting that grew smaller and smaller as she tried to make each precious pencil last as long as possible. She sat in the back of the classroom, not by choice but by the natural order of things. The bright children sat in front, the ones whose parents attended meetings. Maria sat where she would not be called upon, where she could observe without being observed, where her presence or absence would make no measurable difference. She was 8 years old when she understood, truly understood, that she was not wanted. She was sitting at the table eating rice and beans that tasted of nothing. Her father was complaining about money, tallying the cost of each child like an accountant reviewing a failed investment. When he reached her name in the list, he paused, looked at her directly for perhaps the first time in weeks, and said, "That one, I don't even know why we kept her." The words hung in the air. Her siblings kept eating. Her mother kept stirring the pot. No one defended her. No one said, "Don't speak about her that way." The moment passed as quickly as it had come, but something inside Maria crystallized, hardened. She understood then that love was not guaranteed, that family was not safety, that she had been born into a place where her existence was tolerated at best, resented at worst. 7 years passed like water through cupped hands, slipping away before Maria could hold on to anything resembling childhood. By 15, she had stopped going to school, not because she wanted to, but because wanting had nothing to do with the mathematics of survival. Her father had made the announcement over dinner one evening, his voice flat and final. "You're old enough to work now. We need the money." There was no discussion, no consideration of her grades or her quiet dream of finishing secondary school. The decision had been made, and Maria, as always, had no voice in matters concerning her own life. She found work as a maid in the city, 2 hours away by bus, in a neighborhood where the houses had gardens and gates, where children played on manicured lawns without thinking about where their next meal would come from. The family who hired her, the Mendes family, lived in a 3-story house painted pale yellow with white trim, the kind of house Maria had only seen in magazines left behind at the health clinic. She was given a small room off the kitchen, barely large in a closet, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out onto the service area, where the washing machine hummed its endless cycle. The work was relentless. She woke at 5 in the morning, before the family stirred, to prepare breakfast. There were floors to mop, bathrooms to scrub, clothes to wash and iron, meals to cook, dishes to clean. The list never ended. When she finished one task, another appeared like a ghost materializing from the walls. 15 hours a day, sometimes more. Her hands, which had never fully recovered from those childhood years at the sink, developed new calluses, new scars. Her back ached from bending, reaching, carrying. At night, she would collapse onto her bed fully clothed, too exhausted even to dream. The Mendes family was not cruel, which somehow made it worse. They were polite, distant, treating her with the same casual indifference one might show a piece of furniture that performed its function adequately. Senor Mendes barely acknowledged her presence. Senora Mendes would leave lists of tasks on the kitchen counter, her handwriting neat and impersonal. But it was the children who cut deepest. There were 2 of them, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, and Maria would watch in the corners of rooms as their mother kissed their foreheads, as their father swung in the air, as they were asked about their days and their dreams and their fears. She watched this theater of love from the shadows and felt something inside her wither. These children were no more deserving than she had been. They had simply been born into the right house, the right family, the right set of circumstances. And Maria had not. She would serve them their meals and clear their plates and wash their clothes and make their beds, and they would look through her as if she were made of glass. Sometimes a little girl would say thank you, her voice sweet and automatic, trained by parents who taught manners but not empathy. And Maria would smile and nod and retreat back into her invisibility. Every 2 weeks, she would take the bus back to her family's house and deliver most of her wages to her mother. She kept only enough of the bus fare back to the city, and perhaps a small bar of soap. Her mother would take the money without comment, without gratitude, counting the bills with fingers that never trembled. "It's not enough," she would say sometimes, and Maria would apologize even though she was working herself to the bone. Her siblings barely greeted her. Her father would ask how much she had brought before asking how she was. The visits left her feeling more alone than when she was actually alone. The years accumulated. 15 became 16, became 17, became 18. Maria existed in a strange limbo, no longer a child but not quite permitted to be an adult. Her life entirely in service to others. She had no friends. There was no time for friends, no energy for the kinds of relationships that required nurturing. On her rare half-days off, she would walk through the city streets and watch other young people laughing in cafes, holding hands, carrying books, living lives that seemed to belong to a different species. She was 18 years old and felt ancient, hollowed out, a shell going through motions. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. She was dusting the living room, moving carefully around the expensive furniture, the crystal vases, The framed photographs of the Mendes family smiling on beaches and mountains and places Maria would never see. Her hands were shaking slightly. She had not eaten since the small breakfast she had prepared for herself at dawn, and it was now past 3 in the afternoon. The family had gone out for lunch, and she had stayed behind to clean. The hunger made her lightheaded, made her movements less precise than usual. She was dusting a high shelf when it happened. The silver picture frame, ornate and heavy, slipped from her fingers. Everything slowed down. She watched it fall, watched it tumble through the air, heard the shattering sound as it hit the marble floor. Glass exploded outward in 1,000 glittering pieces. The silver frame dented. The photograph inside, a portrait of the family in formal dress, bent and tore. Maria stood frozen, the duster still in her hand, staring at the destruction at her feet. Her heart hammered, so hard she could hear in her ears. Terror flooded through her veins like ice water. That frame was worth more than she made in 3 months, maybe 6 months. She dropped to her knees and tried to gather the pieces, her hands shaking violently now, small cuts appearing on her fingers from the broken glass. She did not feel the pain. All she felt was the crushing weight of her mistake, the knowledge that this would be the final confirmation of her worthlessness. She heard the front door open, footsteps in the hallway. Senora Mendes appeared in the doorway of the living room, still wearing her coat. She stopped. She saw Maria on her knees, surrounded by broken glass and silver and the ruined photograph. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Maria waited for the screaming, for the dismissal, for the demand that she pay for the damage, a debt that would take years to clear. She waited for the inevitable proof that she destroyed everything she touched, that she was exactly what her father had always said, a burden, a mistake, someone who should never have been kept. But Senora Mendes did not scream. Senora Mendes did not scream. She did not raise her voice. She did not even frown. Instead, she did something that Maria had never experienced in her entire 18 years of life. She showed concern, not for the broken frame, not for the ruined photograph, but for Maria herself. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice soft, almost gentle. She moved quickly across the room, stepping carefully around the shattered glass, and knelt down beside Maria. "Let me see your hands." Maria could not speak. Her throat had closed. Tears were streaming down her face, hot and unstoppable, and she hated herself for crying, for showing weakness, for making this moment even worse than it already was. She held out her hands, and Senora Mendes examined them with a tenderness that felt almost violent in its unfamiliarity. There were small cuts, nothing deep, but blood was beginning to well up in thin red lines across her palms and fingers. "Come," Senora Mendes said, taking Maria gently by the elbow and helping her to her feet. "Leave this. We need to clean these cuts before they get infected." She guided Maria to the kitchen, sat her down at the small table where Maria had eaten countless solitary meals, and retrieved the first aid kit from the cupboard. She ran warm water over Maria's hands, patted them dry with careful precision, applied antiseptic that stung but which Maria barely felt to the fog of her confusion. She wrapped the worst cuts in small bandages, her movements practiced and sure. Throughout this entire process, Maria kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the kindness to reveal itself as a prelude to punishment, for Senora Mendes to finish bandaging her hands, and then tell her to pack her things and leave. But it did not happen. Instead, when the bandaging was complete, Senora Mendes filled the kettle and set on the stove. "I'm going to make us some tea," she said, "and then we're going to talk." The tea was chamomile, served in delicate porcelain cups that Maria had washed 1,000 times but never used. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, and for the first time since Maria had started working in this house 3 years ago, Senora Mendes really looked at her. Not through her, not past her, but at her. It was an uncomfortable sensation, being seen, like standing naked in bright light after years in darkness. "Maria," Senora Mendes began, and just the sound of her name spoken with such care made Maria's eyes fill with tears again. "I need you to understand something. That frame means nothing to me. It's just an object. Objects can be replaced. You cannot." She paused, took a sip of her tea, and continued. "I've been watching you for 3 years now. I've watched you work yourself to exhaustion. I've watched you give everything you have and ask for nothing in return. And I've been ashamed of myself for not saying anything sooner." Maria did not understand. The words were in Portuguese, but they made no sense. Why would this woman be ashamed? What did she have to be ashamed of? I don't, Maria started, but her voice cracked and broke. Senora Mendes reached across the table and placed her hand over Maria's bandaged one. How old are you, Maria? 18? 19? Maria nodded. 18. When I was 18, I was at university. I was studying literature and staying up late with friends debating philosophy and falling in love with terrible boys who wrote even worse poetry. I was being young. And you, what are you doing? You're raising my children. You're running my house. You're working like someone twice your age, and I've allowed it because it was convenient for me. The shame in her voice was real, palpable. Maria had never heard an employer speak this way, had never imagined that someone in a position of power might feel guilt about wielding it. I give you your wages, Maria whispered, confused. I have a room. I have food. You have survival, Senora Mendes corrected gently. That's not the same as having a life. Tell me something, Maria. Before you came to work for me, did you go to school? Maria nodded. Were you good at it? Another nod, more hesitant this time. What was your favorite subject? No one had ever asked her that. Not her parents, not her teachers, not anyone. The question hung in the air like something fragile and precious. Mathematics, Maria said finally, her voice barely audible. I liked how it made sense. How there was always a right answer if you worked hard enough to find it. Senora Mendes smiled, and it transformed her face completely. In that moment, she did not look like an employer or a woman of wealth. She looked like someone who understood something important. I see intelligence in you, Maria. Real intelligence. The kind that should be developed, not buried under laundry and dishes. And I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. If you could do anything, if money and circumstances were not an issue, what would you want to do with your life? The question was almost cruel in its impossibility. Maria had trained herself not to want, not to dream, because wanting and dreaming only made the reality of her life more painful. But sitting there in that kitchen, with her hands bandaged and a cup of tea growing cold between her palms, something inside her cracked open. I would want to finish school, she said, and saying it out loud felt like a confession. I would want to learn. I would want to be more than this. The last 3 words came out harder than she intended, edged with a bitterness she did not know she had been carrying. But Senora Mendes did not recoil. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes bright and focused. Then we're going to make that happen, she said with a certainty that seemed to defy reality itself. There's a night school program in the city. It's for adults who didn't finish their education. Classes are in the evening, 3 times a week. I'm going to pay for it, and I'm going to adjust your schedule so you can attend. Maria stared at her, unable to process what she was hearing. This had to be a dream or a mistake, or some kind of test she was failing to understand. Why? She asked, the word falling out of her like a stone. Why would you do that for me? Senora Mendes was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of old regrets. Because when I was your age, someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. My family had money, but they didn't think women needed university. It was my aunt, my father's sister, who paid my tuition in secret, who told me I was capable of more than marriage and children. She changed the entire trajectory of my life, and I've been waiting for a chance to pass that forward. I think you're that chance, Maria. Something shifted in the room, in the air between them, in the very foundation of Maria's understanding of the world. For 18 years, she had been taught that her value was measured in how much she could give, how little she could take, how invisible she could make herself. And here was someone saying the opposite. Here was someone suggesting that she mattered, that she had potential, that she deserved more than survival. The tears came again, but they felt different this time. Not tears of shame or fear, but of something else entirely. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. And hope, Maria knew, was the most terrifying thing of all, because hope could be destroyed. Hope could turn to ash in your hands. But as she sat there with Senora Mendes, who insisted on being called Claudia from that moment forward, Maria made a decision that would alter everything. She decided to hope anyway. The first night of school, Maria stood outside the building for 10 minutes before she could force herself to walk through the door. The school was nothing like the rural classroom of her childhood. This was a technical institute in the heart of the city, housed in a modern building with fluorescent lights and linoleum floors that squeaked under her shoes. Adult students of all ages moved through the hallways with purpose and exhaustion. People who worked all day and studied at night. People who had been denied education and were fighting to reclaim it. Maria clutched her new notebooks to her chest like armor. Claudia had taken her shopping the week before, insisting she needed proper materials. Fresh notebooks with unbroken spines, pens that worked, a simple backpack that did not have holes or fraying straps. Maria had protested at the expense, but Claudia had waved her objections away with a firmness that left no room for argument. "You cannot learn properly without the right tools," she had said. "This is an investment, not a gift." The classroom held about 30 students, most of them older than Maria. She took a seat in the back, old habits asserting themselves, but the teacher, a thin woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, immediately noticed. "You in the back," she called out. "Come sit up front. If you're going to be here, you might as well be present." Maria moved, her face burning, suddenly aware how young she looked compared to the others, how out of place. The first few weeks were brutal. She would wake at 5 in the morning, work until 4 in the afternoon when Claudia insisted she stop, eat a quick meal, then rush to catch the bus to school. Classes ran from 6 to 9:30. She would return to the Mendes house close to 11, her mind buzzing with new information, her body aching with fatigue. She would fall into bed and sleep for 5 hours before the cycle began again. The work itself was harder than she had anticipated. She had left school at 15, and 3 years of not using her mind academically had left gaps in her knowledge that yawned like chasms. She struggled with Portuguese grammar, the rules she had half learned as a child now seeming impossibly complex. History was a blur of dates and names she could not keep straight. Science felt like learning a foreign language. And yet she persisted, driven by something she could not quite name, something that felt like anger and hope mixed together in equal measure. But mathematics was different. From the very first class, when the teacher wrote equations on the board and explained the logic behind solving for unknown variables, something in Maria's brain clicked into place. This was a language she had been looking for her entire life. A system where things made sense, where effort produced results, where the answer did not depend on who you were or where you came from, but only on whether you followed the rules correctly. She began staying after class to ask questions. The math teacher, Professor Santos, was a retired engineer who volunteered his time. He had a patient way of explaining concepts, breaking them down into smaller pieces until they became manageable. He noticed Maria's aptitude immediately. "You have a gift for this," he told her one evening as she worked through a particularly complex problem. "Have you ever considered studying mathematics seriously?" The question seemed absurd. People like Maria did not study mathematics seriously. People like Maria cleaned houses and sent money home and hoped to survive. But the seed had been planted. She began borrowing books from the school library, staying up an extra hour after returning from class to work through problems that were not assigned. Numbers became her refuge, her meditation, her proof that she was capable of something beyond scrubbing floors. The exhaustion was relentless. There were mornings when she could barely lift her arms to hang the laundry, afternoons when she would lean against the kitchen counter and close her eyes for just a moment, fighting to pull asleep, evenings when she would sit in class and struggle to focus through the fog in her brain. She began losing weight she could not afford to lose. Dark circles appeared under her eyes like bruises. Claudia noticed, of course. She began leaving protein-rich meals in Maria's room, insisting she eat before leaving for school. She reduced Maria's workload even further, hiring a part-time helper to cover the heavy cleaning. "You cannot pour from an empty cup," Claudia said when Maria protested. "Your job now is to study. Everything else is secondary." But the hardest battle was not physical. It was a voice in Maria's head, the one that sounded like her father, like her mother, like every person who had ever treated her as disposable. "Who do you think you are?" it whispered during the long bus rides to school. "You're fooling yourself. You're going to fail, and everyone will see that you were never meant for more than this." The voice was persistent, cruel, and worst of all, familiar. It was the voice she had internalized over 18 years of being told she did not matter. There were nights when she believed it, nights when she would stare at her homework and see only meaningless symbols, when the exhaustion would overwhelm her and she would think about how much easier it would be to just stop, to accept her place in the world, to stop fighting against the current that wanted to pull her under. She would think about her siblings back home, none of whom had tried to escape, all of whom had accepted their lot. Why was she any different? What made her think she deserved more? But then she would remember Claudia's face across the kitchen table, the absolute certainty in her voice when she said, "I see intelligence in you." She would remember Professor Santos pausing by her desk to look at her work, nodding with approval. She would remember the feeling of solving a difficult equation, that rush of understanding when chaos became order, and she would pick up her pen and continue. The first exam results came back after 2 months. Maria had scored the highest in mathematics, outperforming students who had far more recent schooling than she did. Professor Santos handed back her paper with a rare smile. 98%, he announced to the class. This is what dedication looks like. The other students turned to look at her, and for the first time in her life, Maria felt pride, not the quiet satisfaction of completing a task, but genuine pride in her own capabilities. Something began to shift inside her. The voice of doubt grew quieter. Not silent, never silent, but less insistent. She started raising her hand in class. She started sitting up straighter. She started believing, in small increments, that maybe she did deserve to be there. That maybe intelligence was not determined by birth or circumstance, but by the willingness to work, to learn, to refuse to accept limitations. 6 months into the program, Claudia asked her how it was going. They were in the kitchen again, the space that had become their unofficial meeting place. It's hard, Maria admitted. Some days I don't think I can keep going. But other days, when I understand something new, when I solve a problem nobody else in class could solve, I feel like I'm becoming someone I was always supposed to be. Does that make sense? Claudia reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Perfect sense, she said. You're not becoming someone new, Maria. You're becoming yourself. The person you have been all along if the world had been fair. 2 years passed in a blur of early mornings and late nights, of textbooks and practice problems, of small victories and crushing setbacks. Maria failed tests. She struggled through subjects that felt impossible. There were weeks when she wanted to quit, when the exhaustion felt like it would swallow her whole. But she did not quit. She could not. Something had awakened in her, a stubborn determination that refused to let circumstances define her worth. The night school program culminated in a comprehensive examination, a gauntlet that would determine whether students received their secondary education certificate. For weeks beforehand, Maria studied with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She reviewed every subject, every concept, filling notebook after notebook with practice problems and essay outlines. Claudia would find her at midnight, still hunched over her books, and gently remind her that sleep was also part of learning. The exam took place over 3 days. Mathematics and sciences on the first day, languages and humanities on the second, a practical assessment on the third. Maria arrived early each morning, her stomach twisted with anxiety, her hands shaking as she picked up her pen. But once the exam began, something remarkable happened. Her mind cleared. The knowledge she had worked so hard to acquire flowed from her memory to the page. Equations solved themselves. Essays structured themselves. She worked steadily, methodically, drawing on every lesson she had absorbed. When the results were posted 2 weeks later, Maria stood in front of the bulletin board, unable to believe what she was seeing. Her name was at the top of the list. Not just passing, but first in her class. 96% overall. The highest score in mathematics the school had recorded in 5 years. Students she had studied alongside congratulated her, their faces genuine in their happiness for her. Professor Santos found her in the hallway afterward, his eyes bright. "I told you that you had a gift," he said. "Now, what are you going to do with it?" The graduation ceremony was small, but dignified. Students received their certificates on a modest stage, while families watched from folding chairs. Maria had not told her biological family about the graduation. She knew they would not come, and the absence would hurt more than not inviting them at all. But Claudia was there, sitting in the front row, her face radiant with pride. When Maria's name was called and she walked across that stage, Claudia stood and applauded. And for Maria, it was enough, more than enough. The certificate was placed in her hands by the school director, a distinguished woman with silver hair. "Congratulations, Miss Santos. Top of your class. What are your plans now?" Maria had not allowed herself to think that far ahead, afraid that hoping for more would invite disappointment. But Professor Santos had already thought ahead for her. He had submitted her name for a university scholarship program designed for exceptional students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Full tuition, housing stipend, books included, everything. The letter arrived 3 weeks after graduation. Maria held the envelope for a full minute before opening it, terrified of what it might contain. Claudia sat beside her at the kitchen table, waiting. When Maria finally tore it open and read the words, her vision blurred with tears. Full scholarship. Accepted into the mathematics program. Classes beginning in 2 months. She had won. Against every odd, every obstacle, every voice that had told her she was nothing, she had won. She would be going to university. She, Maria, the fifth unwanted child from a house with gaps in walls, would be sitting in lecture halls alongside students who had never known poverty, never questioned their right to education. The impossibility of it made her dizzy. But that night, alone in her small room, the familiar doubt crept back in. She would be surrounded by people who had attended private schools, who had tutors, who spoke confidently about concepts she was only beginning to understand. They would know immediately that she did not belong. They would see through her. The scholarship was a mistake. She would fail spectacularly and prove everyone right who had ever doubted her. The first day of university arrived with the weight of all her fears. She stood outside the main building, an impressive structure of stone and glass, watching students flow past her with the easy confidence of people who knew they belonged. She wore new clothes that Claudia had insisted on buying, but they felt like a costume, like she was playing a role she had not auditioned for. Her backpack contained brand new textbooks that had cost more than she used to make in a month. Everything felt surreal. She almost turned around, almost got back on the bus, and returned to the safety of what she knew. But then she remembered Claudia's words from the night before. You earned this, Maria. Nobody gave it to you out of pity. You earned it with your mind and your work. Now go show them what you're capable of. Maria took a breath and walked through the doors. The lecture hall for her first mathematics class held 200 students. She sat somewhere in the middle, not hiding in the back, but not presumptuous enough up front. The professor entered, a renowned mathematician whose work Maria had read about. He began writing on the board, complex equations that would have terrified her 2 years ago. But Maria followed along. She understood. Her hand moved across her notebook, keeping pace, sometimes anticipating where the logic would lead. Halfway through the lecture, the professor paused and asked a question. The room fell silent. Maria knew the answer. She could see it clearly. But speaking up would mean drawing attention to herself, revealing herself, risking exposure. Her hand stayed in her lap. The professor waited. Nobody, he asked. This is fundamental to everything we'll cover this semester. Maria's hand rose, slowly at first, then with more certainty. The professor nodded at her. Yes, in the middle there. Maria's voice shook as she gave her answer, explaining the logic step by step. When she finished, the professor smiled. Exactly right. Beautiful reasoning. What's your name? She told him. He repeated it, committing it to memory. Good. I expect we'll be hearing more from you, Maria. Something broke open inside her in that moment. A wall she had built to protect herself from disappointment crumbled. She belonged here, not because of charity or luck or mistake, but because she had earned her place through sheer force of will and intellect. The girl who had once washed dishes on a wobbly stool, who had been told she was a burden, who had believed she was invisible, was gone. In her place sat someone new, someone who raised her hand, someone who spoke with authority, someone who belonged. University life revealed itself to be both harder and more rewarding than Maria had imagined. The coursework was demanding, requiring hours of study that stretched late into the night. Her classmates came from privileged backgrounds, their conversations peppered with references to travel, private tutors, and summer programs Maria had never heard of. But in the language of mathematics, privilege meant nothing. Either you understood the proofs or you did not. Either you could solve the problems or you could not. And Maria could. She still worked part-time for Claudia, though the arrangement had transformed entirely. Claudia insisted on paying her the same wages for far fewer hours, essentially funding Maria's living expenses while she focused on her studies. Consider a loan if it makes you feel better, Claudia said when Maria protested. Pay me back by becoming everything you're capable of becoming. The two women had evolved from employer and employee into something that resembled family, though neither spoke the word aloud. Maria would join the Mendes family for dinner on Sundays, no longer serving but sitting at the table, discussing her classes while Claudia listened with genuine interest. The children, now older, treated her with respect, even admiration. She had become proof that circumstances could be overcome, that intelligence and determination could reshape destiny. In her third year, Maria's professor recommended her for a competitive internship at one of the country's leading technology firms. The application process was rigorous, requiring essays, interviews, and a technical assessment. Maria prepared obsessively, researching the company, practicing her responses, solving sample problems until she could complete them in her sleep. When the interview day arrived, she wore a suit Claudia had helped her select, her hair pulled back professionally, her materials organized in a leather portfolio. The interview panel consisted of 3 executives, their questions sharp and probing. They asked about her background, and Maria made the split-second decision to be honest. She told them about the poverty, the years as a maid, the night school. She watched their faces for signs of judgment, but saw only interest. "What you've accomplished is remarkable," the lead interviewer said. "But why should we hire someone with no corporate experience over candidates from top international programs?" Maria met her eyes directly. "Because I know what it means to work when the work matters. I know how to solve problems with limited resources. I know how to learn quickly because I've had to, and I know I'll never take this opportunity for granted because I understand exactly how rare it is." The room fell silent. Then the lead interviewer smiled. "When can you start?" The internship began in the summer between her 3rd and 4th years. The office was in a glass tower downtown, the kind of building Maria used to walk past without imagining she might one day work inside. She was assigned to the data analytics team, working on algorithms that optimize supply chain logistics. The work was challenging, but exhilarating. Her mathematical skills, honed through years of disciplined study, gave her an edge in understanding complex systems. Her supervisor, a woman named Patricia, noticed her potential immediately. "You think differently than the other interns," she told Maria after a presentation where Maria had proposed a novel solution to a persistent problem. "You see patterns they miss. That's valuable." Within weeks, Maria was given more responsibility, invited to client meetings, asked to contribute to high-level strategy discussions. The day her internship ended, Patricia called her into her office. Maria assumed it was a standard exit interview, perhaps a letter of recommendation for future applications. Instead, Patricia offered her a full-time position upon graduation. Junior analyst, competitive salary, benefits, a clear path for advancement. "We don't make offers like this often," Patricia said, "but we see something in you. We want you on our team." Maria accepted, her hand shaking as she signed preliminary agreement. That evening, she went directly to Claudia's house, bursting through the door with news she could barely contain. Claudia was in the garden, pruning roses in the fading light. When she saw Maria's face, she set down her shears. "Tell me," she said simply. Maria told her everything. The offer, the salary that was more than her parents had made in 5 years combined, the possibilities opening before her like flowers in spring. Claudia listened, her eyes bright with tears, and when Maria finished, she pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home. "I'm so proud of you," Claudia whispered. "So incredibly proud." They celebrated with wine and cheese in Claudia's dining room, the same room where Maria had once served meals in silence. Now they sat as equals, toasting the futures and possibilities. "I need to tell my family," Maria said eventually, though the thought filled her with complicated emotions. She had sent money home throughout her university years, dutiful deposits that were accepted without acknowledgement or gratitude. She made the trip home the following weekend, taking 2 buses to reach the house where she had grown up. Nothing had changed. The same weathered walls, the same tired faces. Her parents received the news of her job offer with indifference. "That's good," her mother said flatly. "You'll be able to send more money now." Her father nodded. "About time you made something of yourself." No congratulations. No pride. No recognition of what she had overcome. Her siblings looked at her with a mixture of resentment and apathy. She had broken free, and her freedom was an implicit judgment of their choices. Maria realized then that she had been hoping for something that would never come. She had wanted her family to see her, to acknowledge her worth, to celebrate her victories. but they were incapable of it. They saw her only as a resource, a source of income, not as a person who had transformed her entire life through sheer determination. She returned to the city that same night, not waiting until morning as she had planned. On the bus, watching the countryside give way to city lights, she understood something profound. Family was not always blood. Sometimes family was the person who believed in you when no one else did, who invested in your potential, who celebrated your victories as if they were their own. Claudia was more family than the people who shared her DNA had ever been. Her final year of university passed in a blur of thesis work and preparation for her new role. She graduated with honors, her thesis on predictive modeling earning praise from the faculty. Claudia attended the ceremony, as did Patricia from company. Her biological family did not come, and Maria felt only relief at their absence. 5 years passed. Maria thrived in the corporate world, her analytical mind and relentless work ethic propelling her through promotions faster than anyone had anticipated. Junior analyst became senior, analyst became team lead. Her salary grew, her apartment improved, her wardrobe evolved. She was 28 years old and living a life she could not have imagined a decade earlier. But success brought its own complications. Her biological family had discovered that she was doing well. They did not know this from asking about her life or visiting her in the city. They knew because the money she sent home every month had increased. And where there was more money, there were more requests. Her father called asking for a new roof. Her mother needed medical treatments. Her siblings wanted loans for businesses that never materialized, for emergencies that seemed suspiciously convenient. Maria gave at first, driven by old guilt and older obligations. But the requests became demands. The gratitude she hoped for never arrived. Instead, there was entitlement, the assumption that her success belonged to them, that she owed them for the simple fact of her existence. When she tried to set boundaries, her father's voice turned cold. After everything we sacrificed for you, this is how you repay us? We kept you when we could have sent you away. Something hardened in Maria during that phone call. They had not kept her out of love, but out of obligation. They had not sacrificed for her, but resented every resource she consumed. And now they wanted to claim credit for achievements they had actively worked against. She made a decision that felt both liberating and terrifying. She would help in genuine emergencies. But she would not be an endless bank account for people who had never seen her as anything more than a means to an end. The next call from her father, she said no. The silence on the other end was heavy with shock. No one said no to him. "You've changed," he said finally, and it was an accusation. "You think you're better than us now." Maria took a breath. "I think I deserve to be treated with respect. And until that happens, I'm done." She hung up. Her hands shook, but she felt lighter than she had in years. Claudia, meanwhile, had been slowing down, small things at first, forgetting appointments, moving more carefully upstairs, tiring easily during their Sunday dinners. Maria noticed but said nothing, not wanting to embarrass the woman who had given her so much. But one evening, Maria arrived for dinner to find Claudia sitting in the garden, pale and breathless, unable to rise from her chair. The diagnosis came quickly. Heart disease, advanced, requiring surgery and months of recovery. Claudia faced it with characteristic grace, but Maria could see the fear beneath her composure. "I'll be fine," Claudia insisted. "I have excellent doctors." But her hands trembled as she said it, and Maria saw, perhaps for the first time, that the strong woman who had saved her life was vulnerable, mortal, afraid. Maria made arrangements immediately. She took a leave of absence from work, her company granting it without hesitation given her exemplary record. She moved into Claudia's house, taking over the guest room she had once cleaned as a maid. The surgery was scheduled for 3 weeks away. And in that time, Maria became Claudia's caretaker in all the ways Claudia had once been hers. She cooked meals designed for heart health, researched medications, attended doctor appointments, asked the questions Claudia was too overwhelmed to formulate. She held Claudia's hand during moments of panic, when the reality of major surgery became too heavy to bear alone. She organized the household, managed the bills, coordinated with Claudia's children who lived abroad and could not return immediately. The reversal was complete and profound. The girl who had once scrubbed these floors now walked through these rooms with authority and purpose, caring for the woman who had first shown her that she mattered. Claudia tried to protest at first, insisting she did not need so much help. But Maria was firm. "You gave me my life back." Maria said simply, "Let me do this." The night before surgery, they sat together in Claudia's bedroom, the same room Maria had dusted countless times years ago. Claudia was frightened, more frightened than Maria had ever seen her. "What if something goes wrong?" she whispered. "What if I don't wake up?" Maria took her hand, the roles from that kitchen table conversation so many years ago now completely inverted. "Then you will have lived a life that mattered." Maria said, "You changed my destiny, Claudia. You saw a worth in someone the world had dismissed. You invested in potential everyone else overlooked. Because of you, I became someone I never thought possible. That legacy, that impact, it doesn't disappear. It lives in me. It will live in everyone I help because you taught me what belief can do." Claudia's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't do that much," she protested. "I just paid for some classes." Maria shook her head. "You did everything. You saw me when I was invisible. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You treated me like I mattered. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How powerful?" The surgery lasted 6 hours. Maria sat in the waiting room, her mind cycling through every possible outcome, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles went white. When the surgeon finally emerged, his face tired but satisfied, Maria could breathe again. She came through well. "The next 48 hours are critical, but I'm optimistic." Maria stayed at the hospital, sleeping in a chair beside Claudia's bed, monitoring every beep of every machine, alert to every shift in breathing. When Claudia finally opened her eyes 30 hours after surgery, the first face she saw was Maria's. "You're still here," she whispered, her voice rough from intubation. Maria smiled through tears. "Where else would I be?" The recovery was slow, demanding patience from both of them. Maria learned to help Claudia walk, to encourage without pushing, to celebrate small victories like walking to the bathroom unassisted or eating a full meal. Claudia, accustomed to independence, struggled with accepting help. But gradually, she softened, allowing Maria to care for her with the same tenderness she had once shown Maria. Claudia's recovery took 6 months. 6 months during which Maria witnessed a full cycle of vulnerability and strength, of fear giving way to hope, of weakness transforming back into resilience. The woman who had saved her life now depended on her for the most basic needs, and Maria discovered that caregiving was not a burden, but a privilege, an opportunity to repay a debt that could never truly be repaid, but could be honored. As Claudia grew stronger, they talked, long conversations that stretched through afternoons and into evenings, discussions they had never had time for before. Claudia spoke about her own life, her regrets, her marriage that had been comfortable but not passionate, her children who loved her from a distance. Maria shared things she had never told anyone, the depth of her childhood pain, the moment she had nearly given up, the terror that still visited her sometimes in dreams. "Do you know what haunts me most?" Claudia said one afternoon as they sat in the garden, the roses blooming around them. "How many other Mariahs there are. How many brilliant minds are scrubbing floors or picking crops or disappearing into poverty because no one saw them, because no one believed in them. I think about that girl who could have cured diseases or written symphonies or changed the world, but instead she's invisible, and the world never knows what it lost." The words planted themselves in Maria's mind like seeds. She had been thinking similar thoughts, feeling the weight of her own good fortune and the randomness of it. What if Claudia had not been home that day she broke the frame? What if a different employer had fired her, and she had never gotten a chance to prove herself? Her success felt both earned and impossibly lucky, and the contradiction troubled her. When Maria returned to work, she carried those questions with her. She performed her job with the same excellence, but something had shifted in her priorities. She started volunteering at community centers in poor neighborhoods, offering free tutoring in mathematics. She saw herself in the children who attended, The ones with hunger in their eyes and doubt in their voices. The ones who had been told implicitly or explicitly that they did not matter. One girl in particular reminded her of her younger self. 13 years old, quiet, brilliant at numbers, but convinced she had no future. Maria worked with her twice a week, watching the girl's confidence grow with each problem solved, each concept mastered. When the girl's mother thanked her, Maria heard the same desperation she remembered from her own mother. The difference being that this mother wanted more for her daughter, but did not know how to provide it. Maria made a decision. She would create something permanent, something that would outlive her individual efforts. She began researching nonprofit structures, educational programs, scholarship funds. She drafted a proposal for a foundation that would identify talented students from impoverished backgrounds and provide not just money but mentorship, guidance, belief. She would call it the Visibility Project because that was what had saved her, being seen. She presented the idea to Claudia over dinner one Sunday evening, now fully recovered and back to her energetic self. Claudia listened, her eyes growing brighter with each detail Maria shared. When Maria finished, Claudia reached for her hand. "I want to fund it," she said. "The initial capital. Let me do this." Maria started protests, but Claudia stopped her. "You've already repaid me 1,000 times over by becoming who you are. Let me invest in the next generation of Mariahs. It's what my aunt would have wanted. It's what I want." The Visibility Project launched a year later. A small operation at first, identifying 10 students in its inaugural cohort, providing scholarships and pairing each student with a mentor from the professional world. Maria handled it alongside her corporate job, working nights and weekends with the same intensity she had once brought to her studies. The first student they helped was a 13-year-old girl from the community center who received a full scholarship to a prestigious private school. Word spread. Other successful professionals who had overcome poverty reached out, wanting to mentor, to give back, to ensure that talent was not wasted due to circumstance. Donations arrived from unexpected sources. Within 3 years, the project was supporting 50 students. Within 5 years, over 200. The first cohort began graduating from university, several of them with the same kind of scholarships Maria had received, going on to careers in medicine, engineering, law. Maria reduced her hours at the corporate job to focus more on the foundation. Her colleagues understood. Patricia, her former supervisor, now her friend, told her, "You've already proven yourself in this world. Go prove what's possible in another one." Maria took the words as blessing and permission. On the 10th anniversary of the day she broke the silver frame, Maria organized an event, not a gala, but a gathering in Claudia's garden, the place where so much had begun. She invited the students the project had helped, the mentors who had volunteered, the donors who had believed. Claudia, now in her 70s but still sharp and present, moved through the crowd with obvious joy, speaking to young people who carried the same determination Maria had once shown. Maria stood under the old tree and looked at what they had built together. Not just a foundation, but the lives changed, the potential unlocked, the futures redirected. She thought about the girl she had been, standing on that wobbly stool, believing she was worthless. She thought about all the moments she had almost given up, almost accepted the story the world had written for her. "What are you thinking?" Claudia appeared beside her, following her gaze across the garden. "I'm thinking about visibility," Maria said. "How being seen by one person can change everything. You saw me when I was invisible. Claudia, you believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. And now we're doing that for others. We're breaking the cycle." Claudia smiled, her hand finding Maria's. "No, my dear, you're breaking the cycle. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it, who worked until your hands bled, who refused to accept limitations. And now you're holding doors open for others. That's your legacy. That's what belief looks like when it's passed forward." As the sun set over the garden and the young people laughed and dreamed aloud about their futures, Maria understood something profound. She had spent her childhood invisible, her adolescence struggling to be seen, her young adulthood proving she deserved to be seen. But now, finally, she was using her visibility to illuminate others. And that, she realized was the point of the entire journey. Not to escape alone, but to return with light for those still in darkness. Not to forget where she came from, but to ensure fewer people had to start from that same place of invisibility and despair. The girl who had once believed she was nothing had become someone who helped others believe in themselves. And in that transformation, in that legacy of belief passed forward like a torch in darkness, lay the true meaning of being seen. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit the like button. It truly supports the channel. If you haven't already, subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss a new story. And tell me in the comments, what was the biggest turning point in your life? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.